They call it supply chain optimization. I call it keeping 3,400 tons of steel, rubber, chemicals, and human decisions from turning into a highway obituary at 72 miles an hour. My name is Grant Mercer. For 21 years, I was the invisible hinge that kept Halcyon Freight Group swinging instead of snapping. You've never heard my name, but if you bought bottled water 2 states away after a storm, found fresh berries in January, or got a replacement part before your factory line went dark, I was the reason it arrived when it did. My title was Contract Continuity Lead, which is corporate code for the guy who knows where every landmine is buried and keeps the map in his pocket. No skyline office, no glossy headshots. I had a beige cubicle that smelled like burnt espresso and overheated toner, wedged deep in the building where sunlight goes to die. I liked it that way. Quiet lets you hear the machine groan before it breaks. I can smell a port slowdown in Oakland and tell you it's going to choke a delivery in Des Moines 3 days before anyone on CNBC learns what a container is. I know which carriers pad mileage and which will drive through sleet because they still remember the favor I cashed in back in 2009. But let me make one thing clear before I tell you how I toppled a 9-figure operation with a single, perfectly legal email. I didn't want to be anyone's hero. I wanted to do my job and go home with my blood pressure under 180. Quick thing, if you like watching arrogant people discover consequences in real time, you know what to do. Now back to the collapse. The problem started the way it always does, with a farewell. Wade Carraway, the founder, didn't die. He retired to a vineyard in northern Italy that probably had its own security detail. Wade was a brutal man, but he understood diesel prices and penalties and why you don't insult the people who keep your freight moving. We respected each other because we spoke the same language: risk, leverage, deadlines. Then his son arrived, Nolan Carraway, 34, MBA with a donor plaque attached, teeth so perfect they looked manufactured. He walked into the CEO suite in a suit that cost more than my car and smelled like cedar cologne and entitlement. He didn't know a pallet jack from a piano bench, but overnight he was captain of the ship. His first week he installed a wellness bar in the break room. His second week he cut the janitorial team to streamline overhead, which meant the toilets revolted within 2 days. By month 3, he was touring the floor with a woman named Sienna, always in designer sneakers, always laughing, our new culture programs director, which is what you call your favorite accessory when you need to put them on payroll. I kept my head down. I've survived recessions, a pandemic, and a ransomware scare where I routed trucks off printed atlases and a borrowed flip phone. I told myself I could survive Nolan too. I was wrong. Nolan didn't come after me right away. That would have required understanding what I actually did. Instead, he ignored me, which in his world was worse than open hostility. I was legacy infrastructure. Too quiet, too manual, the guy who still picked up the phone, because when a truck full of lithium batteries is overheating, you don't solve it with a reaction emoji. To him, I was a fossil. To me, he was decorative management. Polished, loud, and structurally useless under stress. The friction crept in slowly, like metal fatigue. You don't notice it until something snaps. The moment I knew this would end badly came on a Tuesday in early October. Peak season was warming up, and I was buried in a renegotiation with the Atlantic Dock Workers Council. These guys don't posture, they negotiate with memory. Their lead rep, a man called Brick, had me on the line for hours while we massaged a rate adjustment down to something survivable. That corridor fed half our East Coast distribution. Lose it, and everything downstream choked. Nolan passed my desk mid-call, Sienna trailing behind him like an accessory with a badge. He didn't stop. "Grant," he said, tossing my name over his shoulder, "your area looks messy. Bad look if investors tour the floor." My desk was layered with manifests, handwritten contingencies, contracts flagged with colored tabs. It wasn't clutter, it was the control panel. I covered the receiver. "I'm closing the dock workers' renewal. If I stop, Charleston goes dark."
He stopped, turned, smiled the way people smile at something obsolete.
We have systems for that now. Upload it, lose the paper, it's the future. Then he walked off. Sienna laughed quietly. Brick was still waiting. Problem? He asked. No, I said, just someone confusing appearance with function. I finished the call. I saved the corridor. Again. That single contract generated over $30 million in the next quarter alone. The company celebrated with silence. HR emailed me a reminder about desk policy. The fuse wasn't lit at work. It never is. It was lit when Nolan decided optics mattered more than operations. Mid-October, 12-hour days, caffeine instead of meals. Then the invitation landed. Mandatory attendance. His birthday. Saturday. The worst possible Saturday. Pacific imports, rail transfers, temperature-controlled pharmaceuticals clearing customs. I replied professionally, declined, explained, wished him well. The next morning, my login failed. Once. Twice. I hadn't even finished my coffee when I heard footsteps. Nolan, Sienna. 2 guards pretending this was routine. We're restructuring, Nolan said. You don't align with the culture. I looked at him calmly. You're firing the only person who signs half your live contracts. He smiled. Everyone's replaceable. That was the moment he pulled the pin. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give him the satisfaction of shock. People like Nolan feed on reaction. I simply stood, unclipped my badge, and placed it in his hand. He looked almost disappointed, like he'd expected begging. Good luck, I said. You're gonna need it. He laughed, a thin sound. Security will escort you out. I took my jacket, my phone, and the one framed photo I kept on my desk. I didn't look back. The elevator doors closed at 9:11 a.m. By 9:30, the first outbound convoy would hit the Toledo relay. By 10 o'clock, the system would start realizing it no longer had a pulse. Outside, the air smelled like wet asphalt. I sat in my car and didn't start it right away. Most people panic after 20 years at one company. Mortgage math, insurance, identity. I did some of that. But mostly, my brain shifted into containment mode. Except this time, I wasn't containing damage for Halcyon. I was the damage. My phone was personal. Always was. I never let companies own my lifeline. I opened my private email, the address every union rep, port authority, and carrier executive had for emergencies. I drafted one message. Subject: Notice of change in authorized representation. Effective immediately, I am no longer employed by Halcyon Freight Group and therefore no longer authorized to act as signatory or continuity officer for any active agreements. Per Clause 6C, Key Personnel Continuity, my departure may trigger immediate suspension of services or credit pending review.
Direct all urgent matters to Nolan Carraway, CEO. I read it twice. Dry. Accurate. Unassailable. Clause 6C was insurance. Years ago, when Halcyon's credit was shaky, vendors demanded a safeguard. They trusted me, not the logo. Nolan didn't know the clause existed. He thought contracts were decorative. I didn't blast it. That's amateur. I sent it one by one. Alphabetical. Carriers, ports, brokers. Every send was a domino. My phone rang. Brick from the dockworkers. Grant, what the hell did you just send me? I'm out, I said. This morning. Culture mismatch. A bark of laughter. Does the kid know tonight's chemical load needs a certified sign-off? He thinks software handles it. Silence. Then, my men aren't moving without your signature. Clause 6C, right? Correct. Then nothing moves. The line went dead. I started the engine. As I drove past rows of Halcyon trucks, they looked impressive. They had no idea their fuel cards would start declining within the hour. I needed a command post. I pulled into a diner I'd used for years. Sticky tables, bitter coffee. Perfect. My phone lit up. Dispatchers, brokers, Nolan calling. I let it ring. I opened a public fleet tracker. Red dots began to appear, stationary, one by one. That's when I knew the machine wasn't breaking, it was freezing itself to survive, and Nolan had no idea what he'd just unleashed. The calls came faster after that. Not screaming yet, confused, concerned. The kind of tone people use when they think the problem is temporary and solvable. I ignored most of them, let uncertainty do its work. At 10:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from payroll. Elaine, solid, quiet, the kind of person who never missed a deadline in 15 years. Grant, are you actually gone? Nolan is saying you sabotaged the system. IT can't access Vendoroff. He's losing it. I typed back slowly. I didn't touch the servers. Two-factor authentication routes to my personal number. It was set up that way after the breach in 2021. No one changed it. I didn't send the code. I just watched the seconds tick by while the authorization window expired. At the diner, lunch traffic rolled in. Drivers, utility workers, people whose livelihoods depended on freight moving whether executives understood it or not. My laptop was open to a live map. More red dots. Midwest Yard, Jersey Hub, Miami cold chain starting to stall. Nolan's phone lit up again. I let it buzz itself tired. The first person I answered was not Nolan. It was the Port Authority in Savannah. Grant, we're seeing holds on 6 Halcyon containers. Who signs now? You'll need confirmation from the CEO, I said evenly. We've emailed him. No response. Then, per your compliance manual, you pause release. A pause. Then, understood. Another red dot. My phone rang again. This time I answered. Grant, Nolan snapped. The polish was gone. Stop playing games. Give us the codes. I don't have clearance, I said. You revoked it. You're holding the company hostage. No, I replied. You fired the guarantor. This is what contracts do when trust disappears. He lowered his voice. Come back. Fix this. We'll talk terms. I smiled into my coffee. You already set the terms. Replaceable, remember? He exploded. Something crashed on his end. We have frozen product stuck in Florida. If it spoils, then your insurance carrier will ask why renewals weren't processed on the 15th. Did you know those were manual? Silence, then breathing, heavy, panicked. I hung up. My hands shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I checked the map again. A notification popped up. DOT alert, hazmat incident, interstate shutdown. My stomach dropped. I called Brick immediately. Isn't one of ours? Yes, he said, but not my driver. Nolan hired a spot market scab, no hazmat cert, jackknifed, spill everywhere. I closed my eyes. This wasn't leverage anymore. This was consequence. Is the driver alive? Barely. DOT's grounding the fleet, full audit. I exhaled slowly. That was it. The system hadn't just stalled, it had condemned itself. I sat there, staring at the screen while the diner noise blurred into static. This was the part no one ever understands about systems like this. They don't fail loudly at first. They fail quietly, then all at once. Nolan didn't just lose leverage, he lost authority. The moment the Department of Transportation grounded the fleet, Halcyon stopped being a company and became a liability. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number, New York area code. I answered. Grant Mercer. This is Harold Stein, counsel for Northline Carriers. Our trucks are locked out of the New Jersey yard. Your office is unreachable. Are we in breach? I leaned back. I'm no longer with Halcyon. Please refer to Clause 6C. I can't authorize access. 3 minutes later, another red dot appeared. Yard frozen. Chain reaction. My coffee went cold. I didn't notice. I was already thinking 2 moves ahead. The drivers mattered. Always had. They were the ones who got crushed when executives played pretend. I texted a cold storage foreman in Miami I trusted. Decouple the reefers. Hook to shore power. Charge the contingency account. It's funded. He replied instantly. Already heard. Done. Trucks stay parked. Good. Product safe. Drivers safe. Nolan bleeding. The calls changed after that. No more confusion. Now it was panic. Sienna called. I answered out of curiosity. You have to give us the passwords, she said, voice cracking. Drivers are threatening to call the police. I don't have passwords, I said calmly. And even if I did, sharing them would be illegal. Nolan says you're sabotaging us. Nolan fired the compliance officer, I replied. That's not sabotage, that's physics. She put him on speaker. His voice sounded strained, smaller. You think this is funny? No, I said. I think this is predictable. If you don't fix this, I'll sue you into the ground. For what? Following contract language? He swore, loud, ugly. We have chemical loads sitting idle. Insurance is already calling. You hired uncertified drivers. That's on you. Silence. Then the line went dead. I checked the time. Noon. The cross-dock meeting would be starting. Normally I ran it. Today, Sienna would be explaining to warehouse managers why gates wouldn't open and carriers wouldn't roll. I almost felt bad. Almost. That's when I made the next call. Not to Nolan, not to a vendor, to the one person who stood to gain the most from this collapse. Calder Holt, regional EVP at Meridian Logistics. He'd been circling me for years. I dialed. He answered on the second ring. Grant, he said. I was wondering when you'd call. Calder didn't waste time on small talk. Where are you? He asked. At a diner off Route 17, I said. Stay there. He paused. We should talk. I didn't correct him. I knew what talk meant in his world. Futures, numbers, bloodless words for very human fallout. I closed the laptop and watched the rain smear the window while the calls kept stacking up unanswered. By the time a black sedan pulled into the lot, Halcyon's problems were already metastasizing. The driver opened the door. Leather, silence, money. Calder was waiting downtown at a restaurant where the water cost $10 and no one raised their voice. He looked exactly like a man who profits from chaos. Calm, tailored, eyes always calculating. You've caused a disturbance, he said as I sat down. I didn't cause anything, I replied. I stepped away. He smiled thinly. Same result. He slid a tablet across the table. Live market rates, spot prices spiking, Halcyon loads flooding exchanges at panic premiums. They're bleeding cash trying to cover, he said. Clients are calling us already. They should, I said. They need stability. Calder leaned back. What do you want? Control, I said. Autonomy, a division I run without interference. My vendors, my rules. He didn't answer immediately. That told me everything. My phone vibrated. A DOT bulletin. Mandatory safety audit. Immediate suspension. Calder saw my face change. That bad? Hazmat spill, I said. Uncertified driver. Calder exhaled slowly. That's fatal. Not for everyone, I said. Drivers still need work. Product still needs to move. He nodded. You're offering us the spine. I'm offering you continuity, I corrected, something Halcyon no longer has. While he calculated, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. Grant. It's Wade, the voice said. Older, sharp, furious. What did my son do? I closed my eyes. He fired the system, I said, then tried to replace it with shortcuts. Silence stretched. Where are you? Handling fallout. Don't move, Wade said. I'm landing. I hung up. Calder raised an eyebrow. Founder? Yes. That complicates things. It clarifies them, I said. Calder's tablet pinged. Breaking industry alert. Halcyon Freight, trading halted pending investigation. He looked at the headline, then at me. We need to move fast. You need to move right, I replied. If you want loyalty, you protect the people Nolan just endangered. Calder nodded once. Draft terms. As we stood, my phone lit up again. This time, it was a text, a screenshot, company-wide email, Nolan, ranting, accusations, misspellings, caps lock rage, and an attachment he clearly hadn't meant to send. I opened it. Expense reports, shell companies, personal charges. I looked at Calder. You might want legal ready. He frowned. Why? I held up the screen. Because the prince didn't just crash the fleet, he robbed the kingdom.
The spreadsheet was sloppy. That's what struck me first. Not the numbers, not the totals, but the carelessness. Personal consulting fees routed through shell vendors, retreat expenses, aesthetic services, charges that had nothing to do with freight, compliance, or reality. Nolan hadn't just been reckless, he'd been stupid. Calder leaned over the table, scanned it once, then slowly straightened. "This isn't mismanagement," he said. "This is criminal." "Yes," I replied, "and he just broadcasted to the entire company." My phone rang again. This time I answered without checking the number. "Grant," Wade's voice said, low and controlled. The anger was still there, but now it had weight. "My jet is 20 minutes out. I want to hear this from you before I hear it from anyone else." "You should," I said, "because this isn't about optics anymore. It's about liability." We met him at a private airfield outside the city. No press, no entourage, just Wade Carraway stepping off the jet like a man walking into his own obituary. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. Not weaker, just tired. He didn't yell. That scared me more. "Start talking," he said, as we walked toward the hangar. I told him everything. The firing, the clauses, the frozen yards, the hazmat spill, the DOT, the spreadsheet. I watched each detail land. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he stood there in silence, staring at the tarmac. "He thought you'd fix it," Wade said quietly. "I thought I'd break the law to protect him," I answered. "I don't do that." Wade nodded once. "Where is he?" "Last I heard, still at HQ, Calder said. "Legal is circling." "Good," Wade muttered. "They can catch him before he runs." He turned to me. "If I fire him now, will you come back?" There it was, the offer. Too late. "No," I said. "You can't put the spine back once it's removed." His jaw tightened. "Then what do you want?" "To make sure the drivers don't lose their pensions," I said, "and the warehouses don't get burned because your son wanted to feel important." Wade closed his eyes for a long second. When he opened them, the decision was already made. "Do what you have to do," he said. "Just don't let the people bleed for this." An hour later, Nolan was escorted out of the building, crying, shouting, phones already lighting up with law enforcement requests. The board suspended him. The DOT sealed the yards. Halcyon was finished as an independent company. By nightfall, I was back at Calder's office signing papers that transferred more than contracts. I transferred trust. Calls poured in. Ports, unions, brokers. One by one they followed, not because of money, because they knew who would answer the phone at 3 in the morning. When my phone finally went quiet, I looked out at the city lights. The system was humming again, just not for the people who thought they owned it. By the time midnight rolled around, the damage had settled into something colder and heavier than panic. It was acceptance. Halcyon wasn't coming back from this, not as it was. The news vans were gone, but the consequences were just getting started. DOT seals on gates, auditors in conference rooms, lawyers whispering in hallways where people used to argue about delivery windows. Calder's office overlooked the harbor, cranes frozen against the night sky like mechanical skeletons. I stood there with my phone pressed to my ear, moving what was left of a living system out of a dying body, one call at a time. "Route the Long Beach containers to Meridian, code 441. "Yes, Grant." "Transfer Midwest volume in phases. Don't overwhelm the yards." "Understood." "Honor existing driver rates. No renegotiation games." Every answer came fast. That's how I knew this was the right move. Not obedience, trust. A text came in from Elaine in payroll. Wade fired Nolan. Security walked him out. He was screaming. HR is locked down. People are scared.
I stared at the message longer than I needed to. "Tell them to breathe," I typed back. "No one's pay gets missed." The next call wasn't from work. It was from an unknown number. I answered out of habit. "Grant?" A breath. Then Nolan. His voice was hoarse, unsteady. "You think you won." I said nothing. Silence does more damage than argument. "You were always just a cog," he continued.
"You'll always be replaceable." I looked at the glass wall, the harbor lights, the live dashboard showing freight moving again. "You fired the wrong cog," I said, and ended the call. Calder watched me quietly. "He won't recover from this," he said. "That's not my concern," I replied. "The drivers will." Morning came without ceremony. I hadn't slept. I didn't need to. Adrenaline carries you until it doesn't. We finalized the acquisition before noon. Halcyon's assets, its liabilities, the pension fund. Wade signed everything without protest. The price was symbolic, $1. What mattered was what came with it: responsibility. When I drove past Halcyon's old headquarters later that day, it looked smaller. Just another building. Just another name coming off the sign. I didn't stop. There was nothing left there for me. My phone buzzed again. A message from Brick. "Drivers are good. Pensions secured. We roll when you say roll." I sat at a red light and let that sink in. That was the only victory that mattered. Weeks later, my new office had glass walls and no paper, 3 monitors, clean dashboards, efficiency Nolan would have loved if he'd understood what it took to earn it. A junior analyst hovered in the doorway. "Grant, we've got a blockage in the Suez feeder. Reroute?" I smiled, slipped on my headset, and pulled up the map. "Yeah," I said. "Let's move some freight."
The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with paperwork, hearings, filings, quiet press releases written by people who never missed a bonus. Nolan was charged within the month: embezzlement, fraud, negligent endangerment. The hazmat spill alone drew 3 federal agencies into the room. His lawyers tried to spin it as inexperience. The spreadsheet killed that argument in 5 minutes. Sienna vanished from social media for a week, then reappeared announcing a podcast about surviving toxic leadership. I muted it. Some noise doesn't deserve attention. Wade retreated from public view, sold the vineyard, moved somewhere warm and anonymous. He sent me one letter, handwritten, short. "You were right. I should have listened sooner." I folded it once and put it in a drawer. Closure doesn't need decoration. Meridian absorbed the fleet cleanly. Drivers kept their routes, warehouses kept their crews, the pension funds stayed intact. That was the condition I'd put in writing. Calder grumbled about margins, then watched retention numbers climb and stopped complaining. Loyalty is expensive up front and cheap in the long run. The board figured that out quickly. My days changed shape: fewer emergencies, better systems, but the same rule applied. When something went wrong, I was the call. That's the price of being the spine. You don't get applause, you get responsibility. One afternoon, a junior manager asked me carefully, "Do you regret how it ended?" I didn't answer right away. Regret implies choice without consequence. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it had to happen." He nodded, not fully understanding. He would, someday. A letter arrived at my office, stamped with the Department of Corrections seal. Nolan. 3 pages. Anger, self-pity, blame. He called me a traitor, a parasite, a cog. I read it once, fed it into the shredder, and went back to work. Ghosts don't get a vote. The harbor outside my window was busy. Ships in, ships out. Containers moving like clockwork. Systems don't care about ego. They care about alignment, about people who understand that shortcuts always invoice you later. My phone rang. A carrier stuck in weather. A union question about overtime. Normal problems, real problems, the kind worth solving. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the dashboard. No red dots, no alarms, just motion. That hum I'd listened to for decades. The machine was healthy, not because of software,
because the right people were holding it together. I answered the call. The funny thing about endings is that they never feel like endings when you're inside them. There was no applause, no moment where the room froze and someone said, "This is it." There was just another morning, another dashboard lighting up, another problem that needed solving before it grew teeth. That's how systems survive. Quiet competence, constant attention. A few months after the acquisition closed, I took a walk through one of the Midwest yards that used to fly Halcyon's colors. The sign was gone. New logo, same concrete, same drivers leaning against trailers, drinking bad coffee and arguing about weather. One of them recognized me. "Hey," he said, nodding, "you're the guy who made sure our checks didn't bounce." I shook my head. "I'm the guy who made sure someone answered the phone." He laughed. "That's the same thing." He wasn't wrong. News about Nolan faded fast. A court date here, a postponed hearing there. Eventually, people stopped clicking. The industry moved on. It always does. Sienna's podcast lasted 6 episodes. Wade never reached out again. I heard he was living quietly, finally understanding what it cost to confuse bloodline with capability. I didn't wish him harm. I didn't wish him anything at all. Meridian kept growing, not explosively, sustainably. Fewer press releases, more signed manifests. The board stopped talking about culture and started talking about continuity. Funny how vocabulary changes after pain. One evening, long after everyone else had left, I sat alone in my office with the lights dimmed, watching the live map, trucks moving like veins, ports breathing, a living thing, balanced and fragile. I thought about the day Nolan told me everyone was replaceable. He wasn't entirely wrong. People are replaceable. Trust isn't. You lose that and the whole structure turns brittle. My phone buzzed. New alert. A minor delay in the Northwest Corridor. Snowstorm. I adjusted the route, sent 2 messages, cleared it before it became a headline. The machine kept humming. I shut down the screens and stood by the window. Somewhere out there, freight was moving because 1,000 small decisions lined up instead of colliding. No one would ever know my name. That was fine. Systems don't need statues. They need caretakers. I grabbed my coat and headed out. Tomorrow would bring another problem, another test, another chance for someone with a title to mistake power for understanding. If that happened, I'd be ready. Not to burn anything down, just to let gravity do its work.